everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today is the long-awaited video on how to build the misfire kit. For those of you who aren't familiar with high power rocketry, level 1 and level 2 and level 3 certifications let you buy sequentially higher motor classes. So with an L1 certification, you can buy an H and I motor. With an L2, you can buy a JK or L motor. So to certify, the general gist of it is that you need to build a rocket to fly that motor and recover the rocket in completely reflyable conditions. So you could just like that very same day, pop that motor out, put a new one in and fly it again. And so the key to certification rockets is that they are incredibly reliable, and that usually means that you want them to be low and slow. So I'm gonna show you how to fiberglass it. I'm gonna show you how to fillet everything. It's gonna be so good. Okay, so step 1 is you wanna take some of your masking tape and just tape your sheet of sandpaper down to a table. So we want to chamfer the leading and the trailing edges of our fins. So that'll be this edge and this bottom edge. This outer edge doesn't matter. And a good trick for that is if you put your finger up against the pencil edge, then all of your lines will be nice and parallel. So to taper the leading and trailing edges, the easiest and I think most reliable way to do it is just put your sandpaper on a flat surface. You also might find it easier to hold the sandpaper up against a fin or a block. So then once you have all your fins sanded, we'll grab our centering rings. Okay, so we need to sand the inside of these just a little bit so that it fits nice and snug onto the motor tube without tearing it. So I'll just take that same piece of sandpaper. Even if it fits pretty well already, it's a good idea to sand it at least very lightly so that the glue has something better than just the laser cut surface to bond to. And I'll do that with my forward centering ring as well. And if you have any little bits left behind by the laser, just sand those right off. And then we'll also need to sand the inside of those notches a little bit. Sand them until they slide nicely onto here. So that needs a little bit more sand. Perfect. And then we'll do the same thing to this one. Thing to sand is the bottom half of the, so like fin height of the motor tube, and that'll just give the epoxy something better to bond to. So this one, you're just scuffing it up a little. Okay, for this next step, you're going to need gloves and a caulking gun, which are not included in the kit, as well as either a project mat or just like some way to protect your table. So if you don't have a project mat, but you still have the box. Okay, for this step, you're gonna need your fins that you have sanded, your centering rings that you've sanded, your motor tube that you've sanded, the eye bolt, your motor retainer. So all of that is from the lock kit. And then from the total bit side, for this step, you'll just need your tube of Thixo, one of the mixing nozzles, and a caulk gun. If you don't have the hand strength to force the epoxy through one of these, you can just mix it up on a piece of cardboard, and I'll show you how to do that. And you'll also need gloves. Please do not wear gloves. So the first thing we want to do is dry fit our fin can together. So these should be nice and snug. And how this is going to assemble is those will notch. And you want the bottom of the fin there to be flush with the bottom of the motor tube. So that looks good. Everything nice and even. So now what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna trace. So this is basically gonna tell you where the glue is gonna go. Bottom here. Perfect. And now take it all out. Now you have your fins. You have your lines of where your fins go. And I'm gonna slide the centering ring off and slide it up. So just slide them up, just like that. This is also a good time before the glue is out to put your eye bolt onto your centering ring. So put one washer on, stick that through, and then you want to make sure that it is horizontal, and then put your other washer on the other side, and we will be epoxying this as well. The other preparatory step we're gonna wanna do is take our motor retainer and you're gonna unscrew it and put the outer piece aside. And now this one, you've got your threads on the outside, and then on the inside, you'll notice that we have this ridged section. And the ridged section is going to be glued to the bottom of the motor tube, just like that. But when we do that, we wanna make sure that we don't get any epoxy on the threads. So we're just gonna mask it off. But don't stick it to the inside, because remember, you're gonna have to glue to that ridge. Also be sure to keep a popsicle stick on hand for this step, which also should have come with your kit. Gloves time. Don't ever handle epoxy without gloves. It's just silly, not worth it. So to load your Thixo in the caulk gun, we're gonna need to push the tab on the back and pull it back. Your caulk gun might look different than mine, but they're all roughly the same. There's a lever here and you can pull that back. And then you start with the back. Place that into there and then slide it down. And now you should be able to start tightening. You're also gonna need to pull this plastic protector off the front, just like that. And then we can screw our mixing nozzle right on. If you don't want to use this, then just make sure you have an extra scrap of cardboard around. You can see, so it comes down this mixing nozzle and that'll mix the two parts together for you. And now you do want to prime it a little and make sure that you're getting both parts. So do like a squeeze. And then if it's still coming out even when you've stopped squeezing, you just want to push that down and it'll release the pressure. And now it's stopped. So now we're just gonna put a ring of glue. Now, just gonna slide. And you're gonna wanna kind of twist it so the glue really gets under there. And line your notches up with your lines here. And we'll do that again on this side. So the glue is really getting under there. And now we can glue our fins on. So we just run the line from inside the notch into the notch. And take our fin. And slot it right in there. And you should get squeeze out. We want squeeze out. We're actually gonna even add more squeeze out later. Another thing you wanna do is you wanna really make sure that there's glue inside of those notches. Just have this like nice rounded corner of glue. And you can add more if you need, depending on how much glue you got down there in that initial pass. And now take whatever glue is on your popsicle stick and we're gonna put it around the base here. And remember this guy? Our little masked off motor retainer? We're gonna slide that right onto the bottom. And be sure to really wiggle it around, get the glue in there. And now I like to move it out a little. And at this point, let's sit it vertical. And I do an eyeball check, so make sure all your fins look nice and even and square. And now we're gonna wanna fillet this top one. But you do wanna make sure you don't get any on the outside of these rings. And now the last one for this step is gonna be the ring on the top. And now this ring, it is very important to do a good job epoxying it, since this ring is what your parachute is attached to. So I'm gonna slide that on. I'm gonna hit the glue and really rotate it around. Now I'm leaving I'll leave about a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch, maybe 3/8 lip there. How much you leave doesn't really matter. You just wanna leave a little bit. We'll fillet this bottom. And we wanna smash that epoxy up into this bolt too. because what we really don't want to happen is for that bolt to come loose. And then why we left that lip instead of being flush against the top is so that we can fillet the top too. Let's squish it down in there. And again, I like to put a little dab right at the bottom there. So now at this point, and this is like not quite kit instruction, but I always like to take my fingers, because I'm about to throw the gloves away anyway, and just clean up and make sure. So we want to make sure there's no epoxy on the outside of any of these centering rings. So, and I also want to make sure that there's like epoxy in there. So I want to, you know, just sort of just like tidy up, or if there's areas where, you know, that fillet could be better. And sometimes it's easiest to clean this area up with a finger too. And the good news is I think this is the hardest step. So it's sort of a front-loaded, difficult step, but now that you have the fin can, it's kind of smooth sailing. And in this step, we are going to be installing the airframe tube onto the fin can. So step one here is to prep the airframe tube. So you're gonna grab your pair of scissors, and we are literally just going to cut these slots all the way down. And so now you have this floopy end, but we are not to worry because this bottom centering ring will hold it in place. So it's always a good idea to do a little test fit and make sure that you don't have anything that'll prevent it from sliding on. And so it'll slide up to here. Looks good. And now for this next part, I'm actually not going to use a mixing stick. So I'm just gonna take one small pump of epoxy, and you'll see it dispenses. And if you don't like using the mixing sticks, this is what you'll do for the whole thing. All right, so mix that up nice and good. I like to scrape at the cardboard a little, just make sure. And now I'll just take a little bit on my on my popsicle stick. All right, and now I'll just take a little bit on my popsicle stick. And we're just gonna paint it on the edge of these. And if you were wondering if this will just smear all the way down the inside of the cardboard tube, the answer is yes. We just want at least some amount of glue on there bonding it. So I don't go very thick here because any thickness will just be smeared away. And check that you're up against the tops there and nice and flush against the bottom. And now here, we want to really squeeze these in. So I typically use clamps for this, but if you don't have clamps, that is okay. We'll start by taking pretty much the rest of epoxy here and filleting. So if you don't have clamps, masking tape actually works pretty well. And then pull it as tight as you can. Pull this in. Pull that in. And once this is clamped up, we have to wait another 3 or 4 hours for the glue to dry, and then we can come in and do the exterior fillets. We are going to masking tape off our lines so that they're neat and tidy, because these fillets will be seen and any untidiness will have to be sanded off in the future, and we're trying to avoid sanding. So I'm gonna start by doing the top line. And then I really like the 1.5 inch thick masking tape because it's the right width for this. But if you have a different width of masking tape, you're just gonna have to put two lines down. So you're shooting for about, I don't know, about 1/4 to 3/8. And the fins as well. And for what it's worth, you will be taking this tape off with gloves on. So it is kind of convenient to fold yourself a corner. All right, once your rocket looks like this, we are ready to epoxy. So grab a pair of gloves, So for this step, we're gonna use your second mixing stick if you want to. Otherwise, you can mix it up on cardboard just like I did in the last step. And give ourselves a prime pump. And we'll take another fresh popsicle stick for this step. And we're just gonna squeeze a nice old bead of epoxy all the way down. And again, if it's like dribbling a little bit when you're done, just release the pressure with the lever up here. And now for the fillet, we don't want our popsicle stick to be vertical. You want it to be at about a nice 45. And that's gonna give you that perfect fillet. And if you have a little bit of excess, you can just bring it over to the next fillet. And as you do it, you'll get the hang of how much epoxy to lay down. And then this is the best time to put the fillet on the bottom centering ring, right around here. And while we're in motion, we're gonna stick a fillet around this centering ring as well from the top. And while you're doing that, just try not to get any on the eye bolt. So I just don't continue it to that corner. So now you have filleted your bottom centering ring and your top centering ring. And yes, I know it's pronounced fillet, but fillet is more fun. While the epoxy is still wet, we're gonna peel the masking tape off. And so this step, we wanna be really careful because we don't wanna like accidentally smear epoxy anywhere. Start pulling, and you're gonna get these beautiful, crispy, clean lines. A satisfying peel. If this were the internet in 2015, y'all would be losing your minds. And now, before I pull the side ones, I kind of take this opportunity to just gently smooth out the tops. Because anything that you're able to smooth out by hand here, you don't have to sand. And if you see a glob like this, I'll just move on to the tape. Because again, way easier to remove that while it's still wet. If you don't manage to fix it while it's wet, then you'll just sand it. But that's a pain in the butt, so try to fix it while it's wet. And then your last one will be, and you have a filleted fish. All right, so our next step, before we forget, it's very important you do this now, or else you must find a friend with an arm as long and skinny as mine, and even I have trouble doing this. Get your recovery line, put the rest of your parachute stuff away, and we are going to take our little rubber band off and find an end. And we're gonna take this loop, and we are going to loop it. So now that you're looped through here, we're just gonna take this one and pull it all the way through that loop. And you're gonna pull the whole thing. Now our entire thing is through that loop, and I'm just gonna pull it tight. And now we have a lark's foot knot. And now we have this mess of recovery line that it would be a massive shame if we got epoxy on it, because that would kind of like weaken it and make it less parachute liney. So I'm gonna take a little thing and just, I always wrap my lines like this because they don't get tangled that way. Basically as far down as I can, the rubber band back on. And you can grab a Ziploc bag. I'm just gonna use the one that the motor retainer comes in. So, and now our line won't get epoxy on it. We're gonna take our bag, and it doesn't exist to us anymore. And this is my final plea, do not forget this step. I have forgotten it before, and it is not a career-ending injury. It is simply a massive pain in the butt, because then once this tube is attached, you're gonna have to do that whole thing, except by sticking your arm all the way down the tube, which just isn't fun. And now it is time to make our rocket full length. So we're gonna use this coupler tube, and that's gonna go in here, and then we're gonna glue this one on as well. But first, let's glue this one on. And I'm gonna take my Total Boat super glue. And we'll just go around. And now, this part is important and you do this kind of fast. You just go in there till it stops. We'll do the same thing with this side. And we're gonna quickly. Okay, so now you're gonna grab your trusty piece of sandpaper again, and we're just gonna lightly sand the thin area. So sand over these fillets a little bit just to give it a better edge to bond to, but if you have any bumps that you weren't able to get out, it's like I have a little bump right there, I can just sand it down flat. So give all of these a nice gentle sanding because we're gonna fiberglass to them. Okay, I really like to prep the nose cone about now because now any extra epoxy that you have from laminating your fins and the rest of it, you can just pour into the tip of the nose cone and that'll be your nose weight. A rocket's stability is determined by how nose heavy it is essentially. Well, it's how far ahead of the center of pressure the center of gravity is. And so this rocket, especially if you're flying an L2, for an L1 you don't technically need nose weight, but you should add it anyway. For an L2, you are gonna want probably about 80 grams of nose weight. And the easiest way to do that is just to pour epoxy into the nose, like mix up some epoxy and pour it down there. It'll cure in that shape and then you'll have nose weight literally glued in. But because I hate waste and epoxy is technically a petroleum product, all of the scrap epoxy we'll get from fiberglassing, we'll just pour it right in there. So I do this by drilling 2 holes in the nose cone. So like that. And you're gonna want a second hole for later to attach the parachute. So I'm just gonna do that now. Nice wide hole. If you are opting to not fiberglass your rocket for any reason, this is basically your done rocket. You should not fly an L2 certification on this. You can fly an L1 and be just fine. But I strongly encourage you to fiberglass because I think it's a really important skill if you want to be doing high power stuff like this. If you're not fiberglassing, you can skip to the painting step. So for this next step, I moved to a clean table, but I could just clear off the table that has the rocket on it. Just find a nice clean space that does not have your drop cloth on it. I made this template. It's available on the website, on the instruction guide, but if you don't have a printer, that's fine. You can just, if you really want to, you can make a template by just tracing. And it really doesn't have to be perfect. If you're doing it this way, then I would just go around and add like a 1/2 inch margin. That is fiberglass. It is, in fact, woven glass fiber. Wow. Stick the sticker to something. Fiberglass is delicate because it is only a biaxial weave. So the fiberglass is only running in 2 directions, so it's very easy to like pull it and have it change shape. So you wanna kind of just leave it, be gentle with it. You could measure 10 inches, which is about what you need width-wise. Or you can kind of just say, all right, well that goes all the way around, so I'm gonna cut it there. And I need it up to about there. If you're not good at cutting straight lines, you should probably mark this out. And now, I simply need to cut out this shape 4 times. And that is peel apply. And this stuff is gonna make your life easier and you're gonna learn how to use it all in one go. So this is this nice silky material. And we are, once again, going to trace this shape and cut out 4 of them. We are gonna start fiberglassing. It gets a bad rep, but that's why we're here, to change it. No Taylor Swift lyrics are coming to mind. I tried. Be sure to have your nose cone propped up however you made it vertical somewhere near you. I usually use my vise for this, but I tried to find a way to make it more like you could, anything that just holds your nose cone vertical. good. If I'm doing this as an experienced fiberglasser, I would do all 4 fins at once. However, if you are fiberglassing for the first time, I recommend you do 1 fin at a time. So for this step, we're gonna need to break out our high performance resin. And this is laminating epoxy. So this is what we're gonna use to wet out fiberglass. It is different than Thixo, which we used in the caulk gun, and that's thickened epoxy. And we're gonna need a chip brush and a stirrer. We are going to mix. So when you start mixing the epoxy, you'll notice it gets really cloudy. And then the more you mix it, it gets clearer and clearer. And when you're mixing, be sure that you're scraping the sides, you're scraping the bottom, you're getting in those corners. You need every bit of this epoxy to be mixed. Good rule of thumb is to put on your favorite song and mix for the entirety of that song. They always say mix for 2 to 3 minutes. Zoe, what's your favorite song right now?
Vampire by Dominic Fike.
All right, so everyone go listen to Vampire by Dominic Fike. And when you come back, your epoxy will be mixed. All right, I've now listened to the entirety of Vampire by Dominic Fike for Zoe's recommendation, and my epoxy is looking nice and mixed. So I'm gonna take my chip brush, and now we're going to paint our epoxy lightly. And now you're gonna take your fiberglass sheet and fold it like a hot dog and put it right in the middle. And then push it into these fillets and get it nice and straight and gently pat it down. The key is before you start adding more epoxy, the fiberglass should be sitting exactly where you want it. So be sure that it's all the way in this fillet joint. You wanna be going above the fins just a little bit and going off the edge just a little bit. So you'll notice that this shape that we cut will go off all of the edges just a little, but not too much. And then be sure to press your fiberglass up against your leading edges. And so now that it's sitting right here, now we're going to wet out the fiberglass, which basically means we're gonna take some more epoxy, dip, 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 not too much. And we're gonna start gently painting that into the fibers. And as you do this, it will go clear. So we're basically trying to make all of these glass fibers completely invisible. And for these fillets, I like to stipple the epoxy in a little bit. Make sure we're getting those leading and trailing edges. For these corners, I like to just snip them down to the corner. I'll let you really tuck the fiberglass in there. So now you can see it's gone completely clear. I can still see the weave a little bit, so I'm just gonna paint just a little bit more epoxy over some of the drier patches. But I'm not pushing very hard with my brush because once it's all wetted out, if I push too hard, I might pull the fiberglass away from the rocket and that'll cause a bubble. And I don't want any bubbles. And you do want the, I like having the epoxy wet out just past the edge like this. That helps you cut it off later. So this magical material here is called peel ply. And what's really fun is that it peels off epoxy even when it has soaked up epoxy. So we're gonna put this right on our rocket, exactly the way we put the fiberglass on. So starting from the middle, pushing into those fillets. And then I like to kind of first thing is pat out any seams because the seams can show up. And we're gonna push that in and you should see it start wetting out with the epoxy. And what it's doing is basically absorbing any excess epoxy. And when we peel this off, you're gonna get a way smoother surface than you would have before, and that'll save you a bunch of sanding. But really make sure to try not to have it come up. So once this is nice and smooth and done and ready and perfect and beautiful, and it looks like this, it should look this smooth, we're gonna leave it. And now I'm just gonna take the rest of my epoxy and I'll carefully pour it into the nose cone. If you do drip, on the optional materials list is acetone, and acetone will clean up wet epoxy from anything. So if you spill epoxy on your clothes, if you spill epoxy on yourself, if you spill epoxy on your mom's favorite table, you can use acetone to wipe it away. Although if it's on her favorite table, you might take the finish off the table too, so don't do that. Still be careful. All right, so once your epoxy is fully cured, we can now remove this peel ply. We're just gonna peel this blue layer and it should come right off. Got a pretty nice finish. Just like that. I accidentally left this here for a little while because we had a bunch of other things to do, so if I started trying to trim this fiberglass, it's not bad with like a sharp blade, but if you struggle at all, if you actually heat gun, or you can use like a hot blow dryer or something, just a little bit, it'll soften the epoxy a little. So how I did this one was one at a time. If you're new to fiberglassing, I do recommend doing it one at a time, because then also, I don't know, I think it just lowers the stress. But if you're feeling really ambitious, the best way to do this is to actually grab like a broomstick or something. And it's actually easier if you find a real broomstick and not just a dowel, because the broom will prevent it from spinning around. And then you can just slide it right up the tube and fiberglass from here. If you're doing this method, make sure that your peel ply and your fiberglass is all cut and ready to go before you mix the epoxy. And make sure you take your piece of cardboard and put it on the floor. Usually epoxy is not that great on your floor. Time to mix, time to mix. And again, if I have a little bit of extra epoxy at the end of this, I'm just gonna pour it in my nose cone, so I'm not gonna waste it. Be sure to scrape the edges. So it may be tempting to stop around here, but you can see there's still swirls of unmixed epoxy in there. Other than mixing up a little bit more epoxy and making sure I have the rest of the fiberglass and peel ply already cut and ready to go, the fin layup is exactly the same. Put that on there. Remember to do your fillets first. Run that line in before you start smoothing out the rest of the fiberglass. And then rinse and repeat 3 times. And so now I've done all the other 3 of them, and a nice thing to do is to pinch the tops together when you're doing them, and that'll make sure that the fiberglass stays all the way up against those leading and trailing edges. Make sure your nose cone is always ready. Boom. And now just let it cure. So your epoxy is cure, again, like 4 to 6 hours or so. You can peel off the rest of your peel ply. And if you did your fins one at a time, the process is the same. And you'll notice this just gives you a much more even amount of epoxy, like really nice, smooth finish. And I'm gonna peel all of my peel ply off before I start trimming. Also, this peel ply is not reusable, so don't try to use it again. And we're gonna sand these top bits right here, so you don't need to panic about it. Just be careful when you do this. Try to cut away from you at any given time to reduce your chance of slicing a fingy. And if you have areas where the fiberglass is peeling up like this, that's not gonna do you any good. And it's also not ideal, but like don't beat yourself up over it happening. Like at this speed, it's really not gonna do anything, but you do wanna cut it off. And then we'll sand that smooth. Again, if this happened on a rocket like Spite, I would be a little bit more concerned, but most of fiberglassing this rocket is actually so that you guys can learn how to fiberglass. So what happened here is I didn't pinch the fiberglass together enough, so this side peeled up a little, which is a bummer, but not a big deal. So now you're gonna grab that piece of sandpaper, and we are going to sand just the tops here of the fiberglass to make it smooth, because our next sheet of fiberglass is gonna end right there. It's gonna sit over that. So we wanna make sure it has a nice smooth surface to land on. And for this part, okay, look at me in the eyes and repeat after me. I will never sand fiberglass without a mask on. Because I do not want fiberglass and epoxy in my lungs. Good job. If you have one of these types of respirators or masks, these are ideal. You really want to stop everything. But if not, N100 or even an N95 if you have to from like the COVID era is better than nothing. I personally really like these ones. They're light. They don't work for chemicals, but these are pretty inexpensive and I'll link them down below. I also like wrapping the sandpaper on any kind of like scrap block, and then we're just gonna, and then you can clean it up by just using, I cut up old t-shirts into shop rags and just wipe that away. I'm wiping it away with isopropanol, like isopropyl alcohol,
because it dries really fast, but if you don't have it, you can use water. Just be sure to like really let it dry before you epoxy anything again. All right, so this is pretty good. Again, like I didn't do anything crazy. I just wanted to make sure that the hard ridge was gone, sanded that down a little bit, and that we'll have something for our fiberglass to sit up against.
So now we're going to take that strip that we cut a couple steps ago and lay it on the tube, and we're just gonna make sure that it is long enough, that it wraps all the way around. Very nice, plenty of margin. And I really like to, the fiberglass will have one of the ends you will have cut, and one of the ends is sewn because it's the end of the roll. I really like putting the sewn end on the fins side, and that will help blend these two fiberglass seams together, and it will not, epoxying the edge of fiberglass is very annoying because the glass fibers like pull out of the weave, but here they're sewn in so they won't pull out, so you can really run your epoxy. Your kit shipped with 5 of these, which is enough for each epoxying step to use a new cup. But if you're like me and you really hate plastic waste, I tried to do my best to avoid it. You can actually crack, the epoxy will come out, so you can just pull that out and we have a nice clean cup. So I have 2 strategies of doing this. I think where I have landed is to paint the whole tube with epoxy and then carefully lay the fiberglass over. It is just easier when there's already glue on the surface. You just have to be really careful while you're laying your fiberglass down. If you have a dog or a cat, do not let them in here during this process because you will drip epoxy on the floor. Sasha, are you a little epoxy dog? She wants to be friends so bad.
That's not friends right now. They can't be friends. They have to be far away friends.
Yeah, your dog will not like epoxy dripping on its head. Actually, your dog might not mind, but you will not like epoxy on your dog's head. So do not let your pet in the room while you're doing this. If you don't think you can do a good job laying the fiberglass down, then you can paint just one stripe on the top, lay it down, and that'll give you a little more wiggle room. So you're gonna hold it gently like this, and then we want to make sure that the end overlaps where our fiberglass was just a little bit. So I'm gonna put just the end down, and that's just about the right. If you need to move it, peel it instead of trying to slide it. And the key is to get the top of it nice and smooth and flat, just like that, before you start wrapping the glass around the tube. And you'll see how this edge is like nicely like just hitting the top of these. And now, because this is gonna overlap, you wanna make sure you wrap one side all the way around first. And now we're mostly wet out here. If there's a couple dry patches, that's fine, as long as they're not bubbles. So as long as they're just a little bit dry and they're not lifted from the tube. And the key is you just don't wanna see any dry spots. You wanna make sure the fiberglass is wet out. So now that I'm past the seam, I'm brushing up and down, but don't brush up and down on the seam because you'll mess it up. And the key here is take your time. You have a lot of time on this epoxy. And now I have a relatively complete rocket, completely fiberglassed. Again, if fiberglassing the tube scares you and you just want to do the fins, that is completely viable. If fiberglassing as a whole scares you and you don't want to fiberglass any of it, that's okay. You can definitely still cert your L1 and you could probably cert your L2. I just don't necessarily recommend it, but you'd be fine. So as you can see here, it's not perfect. And the biggest place where it's not perfect is this seam here. So my options were kind of, I could have painted another coat of epoxy on this while it was still green. That would have made it even heavier and lower and slower, which is actually great for certification flight. I didn't do that. I'm just gonna sand the seam. But first I'm gonna trim the end here. Okay, so now it is time to sand the rocket. You can sand as much or as little as you'd like. I think the sign of a really professionally made good rocket is a good job sanding. And I'm gonna do the same thing. I have my sandpaper on my block. If you have one of these, this is also a good option. Just be really careful with a power sander not to overdo it because you don't wanna sand all the way through the glass. So I'll show you how to sand with this block and then I'll show you how to sand with the power sander just in case. And make sure that you're wearing PPE for this. So you should absolutely have a mask to sand fiberglass. If you don't have a mask, if you don't feel comfortable with it, it is better to fly it unsanded than to sand
without proper protective gear. And then safety glasses are also generally a good idea because you don't want anything getting in your eye.
The biggest thing you want to sand is just smooth out this seam. I also really like wearing nitrile gloves when I sand fiberglass because it helps prevent a lot of the little like glass grits from being itchy. But you can see that's already way smoother. You want to sand the transition between the tube wrap and the fins wrap. And look how smooth this is already becoming. Like compared to over here where you still have all these tendrils. And then I'm gonna sand all the edges of my Here is like a pretty good idea of the bare minimum sanding that you should do. You can see some unevenness. It's like a little bit lumpy, but this is flyable. And you can see on the fins, I've knocked back the edges a little bit. Here you can tell the fiberglass that's the spot where it peeled off. I just sanded it smooth a little bit, and then I sanded this transition down. And I did all of that with that one piece of sandpaper and a sanding block. If you wanted to stop here, I would recommend at the very least, like scuffing up your epoxy surface, just so the paint has like a little bit more to grab onto. Or if you really want to get like a nice finish, these are really, really cheap. This sander, I guess I'll link it down below, and these can really smooth it out. I really like the mouse iron shaped sanders for this because they can get up and around the fins really well. All right, so my tube is nice and sanded, and I'll show you up close in a second, but I just want to point out that now, this is the last thing I'm going to do with this cardboard placard down. My next step is actually going to be, I'm going to throw it away because it's covered in fiberglass dust. I don't want that anywhere near me or my house or my loved ones.
And so as you can see, the seam here is like pretty hard to see, and you're gonna wanna give this a nice wipe down with a new clean rag. This is now ready to paint. So once I give it a final wipe down, I'll show you how to clean the nose cone for painting. Again, I use isopropyl alcohol for this because it's better, but if you want to use water, go right ahead, just don't paint right away. Make sure it's like truly, truly dried. All right, I'm also gonna pull this masking tape off at this step. It's gonna have a bunch of epoxy on it, which is annoying. A heat gun or a hair dryer might help pull this epoxy off. And if you have a kind of a clump, as long as there's masking tape under it, you should be able to just stick a screwdriver or something under there. And I'm gonna, before I paint, I will cover that again. Before we paint, we're gonna grab our nose cone. And I only recently learned this trick. The mold release on the nose cone makes it really hard to paint over it, so you get a lot of splotchy, you get a lot of like paint that doesn't stick very well. This white one's pretty bad too, but I painted it white so you can't tell. So let me show you how to mitigate this a little. Ignore all of the dishes in my sink that I haven't done, and take some Dawn dish soap, and this will basically cut through the mold release. And you can also hear how much better that sounds. And once your nose cone is dry, stick it back in your rocket and let's head outside. All right, from here, I am not gonna tell you how to paint your rocket. I tend to spray paint them because it's quicker, but you can also paint, I've also helped people paint them with acrylic paint. My only tip would be if you don't know a lot about spray painting, just don't be too close to the rocket. Stay a nice distance and just layer your nice coats on. Personally, I'm painting the nose cone a different color, so I'm pulling it off quickly, but usually it's easiest to paint it all in one go. And perhaps the most important item of this kit, the decal that ships with it. Now the question is this ready to fly?
No.
Why not, Joe?
It needs some rail buttons.
What else does it need?
A lot of heart.
And also a parachute.
Oh.
For your rail buttons, find some, well, first take the shop cord that's in there. And now take a ruler or a yardstick or whatever item broomstick, until you hit that bottom centering ring, and then pull it out where that centering ring starts. Personally, I eyeball these because I've found eyeballing to be better than any system of measurement, and then take your rail buttons and then pre-drill your hole for your rail buttons. If you punch through just the outer wall of the cardboard and the fiberglass, then you have not hit a centering ring. Like, the pre-drill is to make sure that you are hitting a centering ring because you need that structural support. And screw your second one in. At this point, you're gonna take your parachute cord out of the bag and take your rubber band off and stretch it out. And we want to find explicitly not the center. So I kind of like that ratio right there. So the reason we want it to not be in the center is because mostly because we don't want the nose cone to be hitting the body tube on the way down. Like, it'll mess up your paint. Depending how poorly you built your rocket, it might mess up your certification flight. They could get tangled in each other. You know, all these things you don't want. You don't want them to hit each other. So I always keep my nose cone shorter than my body tube, which leaves us this as our recovery line. Take your parachute out of the bag, take off the rubber band, and now we're gonna carefully unfold our parachute. And we really don't want the lines to get tangled, so we have our fully unfolded parachute, and our first fold, we're gonna fold it in half, but not the way it came folded. You're gonna fold it so that each string has a string buddy, like this.
They're friends.
They're friends. So string meets string here, string meets string there, string meets string there, string meets string there, and there's no string on the ends. And then for the next one, you'll do the same thing. So string meets string. And now all of your strings should be coming out neatly in the same spot. And then once they're all out like this, I'll take my neat loops and stack them on top of each other. And you'll notice that there are no twists in the lines at all. They are all neat all the way down. And then I'll take that loop and just tie a knot in the bottom. And our last couple folds here, we're gonna take this, we'll fold it, and so now your strings should be on the end. And then I fold one more time in to get this sort of like skinnier, longer parachute. And now here, I'll do a Z fold. So split our parachute into thirds and then just fold it just like that. So now I've got my not halfway point, which is the point that I'm folding to, and I have my end here. And I'm gonna just mark this and put my free end through this loop and also through the slot in your orange piece of Nomex. And this Nomex piece is a fire retardant blanket, so when the black powder charge in your motor ejects and blasts your parachute out of the rocket, this will protect your parachute and your cords and lines and whatnot from getting burned. So really important piece, don't forget it. Also, don't forget to tie it to this spot that we are tying it to right now. Otherwise you might litter it in the desert or the cornfield or wherever you're launching your rocket. And for a cert flight, you need to get all of your parts back. So littering will cause you to fail your certification. And so here, I have this in this spot and I'm just gonna tie a knot right here. So exact same, it's like a normal overhand knot. What is a little annoying is you have to pull your whole parachute assembly through the knot. But then you are ready to go. And now we cook. It's burrito time, everybody. So take your nice little parachute and place it on your Nomex blanket. Crisscross the rest of your lines. So you don't, whatever you do, don't do that. absolutely do not, no curlies, and do not, no matter how tempting it is, wrap the parachute. You would really risk the parachute not deploying. Everything we're doing here is to make sure that the parachute deploys as easily as possible. So we want our lines to be extremely nice and ready to not tangle, not wrap around anything. Just zigzag, neat and tidy. And now you just take your Nomex blanket and wrap it into a tidy little burrito. The key is that the parachute needs to be protected from the ejection charge. So that means that just the bottom needs to be fully covered by the Nomex. I personally would not fly something like this. Still try to make sure that your parachute is as fully wrapped as possible. And when you put it in, make sure that the Nomex doesn't open in the tube, exposing the parachute. Little burrito will be the first one in there. And you just wanna make sure all of those lines are protected. And now the second thing you wanna do, I like to grab a little bit of masking tape for this step. Sometimes I even stick it on my hand first to make it a little less sticky. And the way that I wrap my parachute cords is I take an open palm like this with my pinky and my thumb spread out. Back of the pinky, front of the thumb, back of the pinky, front of the thumb, back of the pinky, front of the thumb.
Oh, you ruined it. All right, from the top,
And then grab the middle and slide it off your hand. And then this is where I just take my little bit of masking tape. And now I have a little bundle that's not gonna get tangled when I put it inside the tube. And you want that bundle to be on top of the Nomex burrito. That Nomex is going to protect these lines from your ejection charge as well. To connect the nose cone, we're gonna take the end of our parachute line and feed it into one of the holes and out the other of the holes, just like that. And then take your quick link and connect the open loop to that line and close it up. And so now you have what is basically a lark's foot, but connected via a quick link. And the reason we're not quick linking directly to the plastic, like to one of these holes, is that those break really, really easily. So this is just giving us a lot more structural plastic to work with. When your nose cone ejects and this pulls super tight, you're distributing that load a lot more than one of these little notches. And then with this line, I'm gonna do the exact same thing. We're gonna figure 8. Got our little blue taped bundle. Put that in. And now slide. And now we need to make sure that the nose cone is on tight enough, but not too tight. A good rule of thumb for this is that you should be able to pick up the rocket by the nose cone. So we've already failed. And so what I'm gonna do to mitigate this is take some blue tape, and check it. I can lift it, and then if I go like that, it should come loose. So that's about the tightness of the nose cone that you're looking for. If you put one piece on, it's still not enough, then you can just take, your next piece and put it right on there. Oh, the other thing is that sometimes I've found, like if you're doing this at night, the night before or something, and you go to the launch pad the next day and it's hotter, that might change. So just bring your blue tape with you to the launch. Okay, so I'm now at the launch site, and the last step to do to launch my rocket is to put the motor into the rocket. But there's a little bit of prep we need to do first. So the first thing you need to figure out is what the optimum delay charge for your motor and your rocket is. So I have mine here in open rocket, and my optimum delay is 7.5 seconds. So we're gonna call that 8 seconds. If you open your motor tubes, I'm gonna use a DMS, and I'll fly an H100 first. It'll come with this little tube of black powder, an igniter, and your motor itself. Step 1, we'll take our motor out of bag. Your ejection charge will go in the top here, and this is your nozzle. So it will slide into the rocket this way. So the delay on the ejection charge is saying how long is the rocket going to wait before it fires the ejection charge, which is what launches your nose cone and your parachute off the rocket. I want 8 seconds, so I'm gonna use this universal delay drilling tool. These are pretty annoyingly specific. You can kind of wing it, but honestly, most launch sites will have one you can borrow. This has a 14-second delay. I want an 8-second delay, so I have to take 6 seconds of the delay off of the motor. So, and I can just put this here and manually drill the motor. Notice just some of the charge. With the delay drilled, we have several items in this little baggie. So we're gonna take our igniter and tape it to our rocket. But we also have this little washer, this little plug, and this little tube of black powder. And how we're gonna assemble this is we put the washer into the motor, just like that. And then we'll take your tube of black powder and pour that right on in. For a rocket this size, you're gonna wanna use the whole tube. And then just press this plug in. And now this motor is ready to go. The last step is to integrate the motor. You're gonna take yellow end up into the rocket, and then motor slides in there. And then your motor retainer just screws that on. And one of the biggest rules for rocketry safety is the igniter does not go in the rocket until the rocket is on the pad, vertical, and ready to launch. And you're wearing safety glasses the whole time. Once you've completed your dramatic walk to the rail, I like to set the rocket down, and every launch site is gonna have different rails. So what I say here is not gonna be as applicable to you as the rest of this build, but these ones have a pin, pull the pin. If you have these, just be very, very careful that you're aware of where that rail is at any given time and you don't like hit yourself with it. This part will be applicable. So this is a 10-10 rail. The rail buttons that are included with the kit are for 10-10 rails. So how they go on is, so the rail button slides right into the rail like that. And then your second rail button slides right into the rail like that. And now you just slide your rocket all the way down. Keep in mind, at this point, we still do not have the igniter in the rocket. And I'll lift it up, stick our pin back in, and now we are ready to do the igniter. So you should have igniter leads. Again, every launch site has their own way of doing it. Almost everyone has alligator clips at the ends of their igniter leads. And we will start by make sure you were wearing safety glasses, sunglasses, something to protect your eyes. So I have pre-prepped my igniter here. And the most important part of that is I have twisted the ends of my igniter leads together. We're shorting them together so that it can never accidentally ignite. So I'm gonna straighten her out. This is the E-match here at the end. So we're gonna stick it up the bottom. There's a hole in the bottom of the motor. We're gonna stick it all the way up until you hit the end. And then what I always do is I pinch my fingers at the bottom where it bottoms out, and I pull it out and I say, does that look right? So that looks about right for an H motor, and I'll stick that back up there. And now I like to do something like wrap the wire somewhere to hold it in place. I'm gonna untwist my leads, pull them apart a little bit, and you wanna make sure that these are gonna be really far apart so nothing can risk touching each other. Alligator clip and twist around. Put that one there. Alligator clip, twist around. And you wanna make sure that this is far enough back from where your motor is gonna ignite that you don't burn the leads, because that's a really rude thing to do to your launch site. And we are done here at the rocket. The last thing we have to do is check the continuity of the leads. And again, this will be launch site dependent. Here, all of our igniters have continuity checkers. So I have continuity, so I'm ready to launch.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
We had our shoot deploy. Nose cone paint does honestly not look worse than when I dropped it in my shop. And yeah, that's a perfectly intact certification rocket. Congrats to me on my 10th L1 from developing these kits.